The only heir is my daughter. The rest of you are worthless, my daughter-in-law screamed in my face. I didn't answer her. That night, I hugged my 3 grandchildren, and we left the house taking the secret of the $60 million with me and leaving the DNA proof that would destroy all her lies on the table. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. That morning, the Texas sun was beating down the kind that burns your soul. I was standing in our small kitchen, flipping tortillas on the griddle, trying not to let them burn. The smell of beans simmering in the pot rose up, but it wasn't enough to cover the poverty that clung to every corner of the house. On the table, there were just a few tortillas, a plate of beans, and a cup of coffee so weak it didn't taste like anything. I glanced over at Michael, my little boy, only 3 years old, playing in his old wooden crib with some broken toy pieces. Roger, my husband, was sitting at a corner of the table frowning and muttering something about breakfast. Beans again, Emily. How am I supposed to work on this every day? His voice was sharp like a knife twisting inside me. I bit my tongue to keep from talking back. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just trying to survive another day. Then, like a strange gust of wind, everything changed. A brand new, shiny car glided down the alley in front of our house. The silent engine stopped, and I heard a door open. I peeked through the dusty window. A woman got out of the car, dressed elegantly with her hair in a high bun and heels that sparkled in the sun. Her gaze passed over me cold, as if I wasn't worth a second of her time. Roger jumped up and quickly put on a white shirt, the only good one he had, the one he wore to church. He splashed on some cheap cologne, the kind that smells really strong, and filled the whole kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling, though I tried to sound calm. Roger didn't even look at me. He just answered dryly, "To a meeting." He went out and opened the car door for that woman with a gesture so delicate, as if she were a treasure. She smiled and handed him a thick, bulging envelope. Their eyes met as if they shared a secret I could never be part of. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still clutching my old worn dress. Roger turned and looked at me one last time. There was no warmth left in his eyes, only an icy determination. "I can't live in this misery anymore, Emily," he said in a monotone voice, as if reciting something he knew by heart. "She can give me a better life." Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. Before I could say anything, he was already getting in the car. The car started leaving a cloud of dust in the alley. I ran after him, screaming his name, but my voice was lost in Michael's cries coming from the house. But the car had already disappeared at the end of the street, taking with it the entire world I thought was mine. I went back to the house, my feet heavy as if I were dragging stones. Michael was still crying, and his childish sobs drowned out the sound of my heart breaking into pieces. I hugged him tightly, as if letting him go would mean losing him too. My tears fell, wetting his curly hair. The kitchen felt empty. Only the smell of cold beans and burnt tortillas remained. I felt lost, as if I were in the middle of a desert, with no idea where to go. My neighbor, Mrs. Rose Hernandez, came running. She must have heard the screams from far away. She put her arm around my shoulders, her voice full of pity. "That man didn't deserve you, honey. A man like that, it's better that he's gone." I nodded, but the pain was tearing me apart. Deserved him or not, he was still the man I had once loved, the one I had hoped to build a home with. That night I couldn't let myself sink into sadness. Michael needed milk diapers. He needed a strong mother. I went to knock on the door of Anne's Bakery, an old acquaintance, to ask for a job on the night shift. "Can you give me a hand?" I asked, my voice choked. Anne looked at me, then at Michael, sleeping in my arms, and nodded. "Of course, Emily. Bring the boy. We'll put him to sleep by the oven so he stays warm." That night, as I kneaded the dough with my hands, my eyes burned from the smoke and the tears. Michael slept in a wicker basket I brought, and every now and then he would stir and let out a little whimper. His cries mixed with the noise of the mixer, making the other bakers look at me with pity. An older woman brought me a glass of water and shook her head. "That's just how it is for us women. We suffer a lot, but our children are the reason we keep going." I nodded, swallowing my tears, and kept kneading. When I got home, the little house was sunk in darkness. The chirping of the crickets outside seemed to tell my story, that of an abandoned woman with nothing but her son and a broken heart. I lay down on the old bed, listening to Michael's peaceful breathing. Staring at the water stains on the ceiling, I knew my life had taken a different path. A path without Roger, without the dreams of a complete family. I took my son's hand and whispered, "As long as I have you, Mommy can handle anything." But inside I was terrified, afraid I wouldn't be strong enough, afraid that the days to come would be filled with darkness. Time passed silently, like raindrops on the tin roof, leaving nothing but a constant sound. Michael grew up in my arms, but the shadow of his father, Roger, was a void that never filled. I watched my boy grow from a toddler clinging to my legs crying for milk to a tall young man with his father's eyes sharp but full of restlessness. I had hoped he would be different, that he wouldn't follow in Roger's footsteps. But life is never how you want it to be. When Michael became a teenager, I started to notice bad signs. He would come home late, his shirt ironed, but smelling of cheap tequila, and his eyes red as if he'd been in a fight. "Where were you so late, Michael?" I would ask. He would just grunt. "Don't worry, Mom. I know what I'm doing." And he would slam his bedroom door, leaving me with an anxiety that ate me up inside. One day, Mrs. Rose, my good neighbor, pulled me to a corner of the yard and whispered as if she was afraid someone might hear her. "Listen, Emily, your son is spending a lot of time with Allison, Mr. Sains's daughter. Be careful, that girl is not to be trusted." I nodded, thanking her, but my heart was in a knot. I knew Allison, a pretty girl with long black hair, who always wore short skirts and had a bright but calculating look in her eyes. I just prayed to God that Michael wouldn't get into trouble. A few months later, on a drizzly afternoon, someone knocked softly on the door. I opened it to see Allison, her eyes full of tears, and a hand on her already swollen belly. She looked at me, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Emily, I'm pregnant. Michael said he would marry me, but now he's disappeared." I froze. I felt the floor open up beneath me. History was repeating itself, but this time it was my son, not Roger. I let Allison in and made her a hot tea. "You can stay here as long as you need," I said, though the pain was tearing my soul apart. "But where is Michael?" Allison shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He said he was going to work far away, but I call him and he doesn't answer." I hugged her, trying to hide the overwhelming disappointment. That night, Allison slept curled up on the old armchair, and I stayed by the stove watching the fire, wondering what I had done wrong for my son to become a man like that. Soon after, Allison gave birth to a baby girl and named her Daisy. I looked at my granddaughter's tiny face, her big round eyes identical to Michael's, and felt a mix of love and sadness. To get money for milk and diapers, I had to pawn my wedding ring, the last thing I had left from my wedding to Roger. The jeweler looked at me with pity. "Mrs. Emily, are you sure it's a memory?" I nodded, swallowing my tears. "My granddaughter needs it more." With the little money they gave me, I bought what Daisy needed, but every time I looked at my empty hands, I felt a hole in my chest. Less than a year later, trouble knocked on my door again. Another girl, Marisol, came looking for me. She worked as a waitress in a bar near the market. She had bleached blonde hair and a voice hoarse from smoking. "You're Michael's mom, right?" she asked, with one hand on her barely noticeable belly. I nodded, no longer surprised. Marisol told me, full of anger. "He promised he would take care of the baby, but last week he told me he had to go to Chicago on business, and I haven't heard from him since." I invited her in, served her a weak coffee, and listened to her talk about Michael's promises I knew he would never keep. When Marisol gave birth to Mark, I brought him home. The little house now felt tighter with Daisy and Mark sharing an old mattress. I gave my bed to the children and started sleeping in a hammock strung up in a corner. Every night the cold air seeped through the cracks in the wall. I covered myself with a thin blanket, but there was nothing that could warm the cold I felt in my soul. Not even 2 years had passed when another girl showed up. Teresa, a young student, stood at my door, her hands trembling over her pregnant belly. "Are you Michael's mom?" she asked in a voice so faint it sounded like she was about to cry. I just nodded and offered her a chair. Teresa told me, her eyes red, He told me he loved me, that he would take me to Chicago to start over, but now I can't find him anywhere. I listened with a dead heart. Once again, my son was leaving a fatherless child behind. When Teresa gave birth to Kevin, I brought him home even though we were already out of space. My 3 grandchildren, Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, slept huddled together on the torn mattress, while I remained in the hammock, listening to them cough in the night. Mrs. Rose brought me some old blankets and baby clothes she got from the church. "Oh, Emily, you suffer so much," she said with teary eyes, "but God will help you." I forced a smile, but inside I no longer believed in miracles. To support my 3 grandchildren, I had to get 2 jobs. During the day, I pushed my tamale cart through the town market, shouting until my voice was hoarse. "Tamales, hot tamales, get your tamales!" The smell of dough and meat wafted from the cart, but I didn't dare eat one myself. I saved the leftovers for the children. At night, I cleaned a small hotel near downtown. It was hard work mopping floors and washing sheets until my hands swelled up. One day I saw myself in the hotel bathroom mirror and noticed I already had gray hairs, my eyes sunken. "Emily, when did you get old?" I asked myself. But then I would think of my 3 grandchildren at home and grit my teeth to keep going. One morning, Daisy got very sick with a fever that burned her body. I carried her and ran to the public health clinic at 5 in the morning, waiting in line with a crowd of people. The nurse shook her head. "She needs a special medicine. Here we only have something to lower the fever." I panicked. I ran to the pharmacy near the market and asked them to give me the medicine on credit. The pharmacist looked at me and sighed. "Mrs. Emily, you already owe me a lot. I'll let you have it this time, but next time will be difficult." I nodded, thanking him 1,000 times, and hugged the medicine bottle as if it were a treasure. When I got home, I gave Daisy the medicine and stayed up all night watching over her, stroking her forehead and praying, "Please, God, don't take my little girl." That night, just as I got Mark and Kevin to sleep, a car stopped in the alley. Michael walked in wearing an ironed shirt and his hair styled with gel, a far cry from the careless boy he used to be. The new car gleamed under the moonlight. He looked at me and gave a half smile. "Mom, are the kids okay?" Before I could answer, he took out his wallet, put a few bills in my hand, and said, "I'm very busy. Here, take this to help with them." I looked at the money. It wasn't even enough for a week's worth of milk, and I felt a lump in my throat. "Michael, you can't keep abandoning your children like this," I said, my voice trembling. He just shrugged. "Mom, I'm trying to get ahead. I'll take care of everyone later." With that, he turned, got into his car, and disappeared into the night. I stood there clutching the bills in my hand, tears streaming down my face. My 3 innocent grandchildren slept inside, and I was carrying the weight of an entire generation. One morning, as I was arranging the tamales in my cart, old Mrs. Lupe, who sells vegetables next to me, pulled my arm and whispered, as if afraid someone would hear, "Hey, Emily, your son is a big shot now. He was on TV on the local news." I froze. The hand holding a hot tamale began to shake. "On TV, Michael?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Mrs. Lupe nodded and pointed to a nearby little store where a small television was on. Another vendor, Mr. John, joined the conversation. "They say he invested in some land in Chicago and hit the jackpot. Now he's rolling in money." I just stood there with a mix of pride and pain. Pride because my son, who grew up in poverty, was now being mentioned on television, but pain because I knew he no longer remembered his mother or his children. That afternoon, I borrowed a gossip magazine from Mrs. Rose. On the front page was a photo of Michael in an elegant black suit standing next to a gleaming Audi. His smile was huge, but his eyes looked cold. They no longer resembled the eyes of the little boy who once hugged me crying for milk. The headline read in large letters, "Young local entrepreneur hits the jackpot in real estate." I read it and felt like I was suffocating. It was true he had gotten ahead, but at what cost? The cost was me, Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, the ones left behind in the leaky little house. The next day, while mopping the hotel floor, I heard the familiar sound of a car stopping in the alley. I ran home, my heart pounding, hoping to see my son. Michael walked in taller, smelling of expensive perfume instead of cheap tequila. But he didn't look at me with the eyes of a son. He just handed me a thick envelope and said dryly, "Here, Mom. I can't stay tied to this poverty. I have a new life now." I took the envelope, my hands trembling, wanting to ask him about his children, about Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, the children who carried his blood. But before I could open my mouth, he had already turned and was heading to his car. The engine roared, and he disappeared just like Roger had abandoned me years ago. I opened the envelope. There were only a few bills. It wasn't even enough to support the children for a month. I felt my heart clench. "Michael, my son, why did you become like this?" I whispered, as tears fell onto the dirt floor. A few weeks later, a wedding invitation arrived on shiny paper with gold letters. Michael was marrying Isabella Torres, the daughter of a construction tycoon from Chicago. The wedding would be at a luxury hotel downtown, a place people like me could only dream of. I held the invitation, read it over and over, but I didn't see my name or my grandchildren's on the guest list. Mrs. Rose told me, her voice filled with awe. "Emily, did you see the wedding in the paper? Isabella wore a very long white dress. There were crystal chandeliers sparkling everywhere, and reporters were crowding around to take pictures. It was a huge event." I nodded, but I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My son, whom I raised with my sweat and tears, was now entering a strange world, a world where there was no place for his mother or his children. From the day of the wedding, Michael stopped calling. I tried to call him, but his number was always out of service. One time I gathered my courage and took a bus to Chicago to look for the real estate office where Michael worked. The building was massive with gleaming glass windows. It was nothing like I had ever seen back home. The receptionist, a cold young woman, looked me up and down and said, "Mr. Rodriguez doesn't take family matters here." I stood there in my old worn dress and my old sandals, feeling so small I wanted to disappear. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice trembling. She just shrugged. "I'm sorry, those are the rules." I returned on the long bus ride, tears streaming down my face. Michael, my son, now belonged to a world I could no longer touch. A few months later, I ran into Michael by chance at a mall in my town. I had taken Daisy to buy new shoes, the cheapest I could find, because her little feet no longer fit in her old ones. In the distance, I saw Michael, still impeccable in his suit, next to a young, arrogant-looking woman with blonde hair and expensive clothes. She was holding a boy of about 3 with a fair face and curly brown hair. I approached, my heart pounding. "Michael!" I called out, my voice choked. He turned around with a surprised expression. "Mom!" he said, and awkwardly put his hand on my shoulder for a second. "This is Isabella, my wife, and this is Simon, my son." Isabella looked me over from my worn dress to my old sandals and whispered to Michael, "Let's go, darling." I stood there in the middle of the bustle and could only nod, though I felt a lump in my throat. Daisy tugged on my hand and asked in a low voice, "Grandma, is that my daddy?" I swallowed my tears and forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, but your daddy is very busy." From that day on, every time I called Michael, Isabella's voice answered on the other end, cold and sharp. "Stop bothering my husband. He has a real family now." Those words were like a stab straight to the heart. A real family. Then what were Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, the children who carried Michael's blood? I would sit in my little house, hugging my 3 grandchildren, listening to them ask, "Grandma, where is our dad?" I would just stroke their hair and lie to them. "Your dad is very busy working, but he loves you very much." But every time I said it, I felt like I was betraying myself. The tears would escape, but I wiped them away quickly. I didn't want the children to see their grandmother cry. One afternoon during a torrential downpour, I was in the small kitchen washing dishes. The cold water chilled my bones and made me shiver. My 3 grandchildren, Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, were playing in a corner of the house, and their innocent laughter was the only thing keeping me from sinking into loneliness. Suddenly, desperate knocks on the door interrupted everything. I dried my hands on my apron and opened it. It was Mrs. Rose, pale and soaking wet. "Emily, turn on the TV!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "There was a horrible accident on the highway to the city. It looks like it was your son's car." I felt my heart stop. I stumbled into the house. I turned on the old television, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the remote. On the screen was the image of an SUV in flames with a column of black smoke rising into the gray, rainy sky. The reporter's voice came on cold and clear. The victim businessman, Michael Rodriguez, died at the scene in this terrible accident on the highway. My son's name resonated like a dagger in my chest. I fell to my knees on the floor, still holding the wet rag, and tears flowed uncontrollably. Daisy ran to me and pulled my arm with her little girl voice. "Grandma, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Mark and Kevin also came closer, their eyes wide and scared. I wanted to answer them, to say something to calm them down, but I had a lump in my throat. I just hugged all three of them with all my might, sobbing uncontrollably, as if letting them go would mean losing them too. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt icy cold, and the rain pounding on the tin roof was like a hammer on my soul. I sat at the old wooden table, looking at a picture of Michael when he was a child, with a radiant smile and eyes as bright as stars. "My son, why did this happen?" I whispered, as my tears fell on the photo. I remembered the days I rocked him to sleep, the sleepless nights, kneading dough to buy him milk. Now he was gone, not for a new life, but forever. But deep in my heart, something wouldn't let me rest, a little voice telling me that things weren't that simple. The next day I took a bus to the city to the lavish wake they organized for Michael. I wore the best dress I had, even though it was worn at the shoulders and faded. The streets were full of life, but my heart was an empty space. When I arrived, an employee in a black suit stopped me at the entrance. "Excuse me, ma'am, your name is not on the guest list," he said in a cold voice. I pleaded with him. "I'm Michael's mother. Please let me in to say goodbye to my son." He shook his head without a hint of emotion. "These are the family's orders. I ask that you understand." The family, I was his mother, and they didn't consider me family. I stood outside looking through the glass doors. Isabella, Michael's wife, dressed in mourning, was tightly hugging little Simon in front of the cameras. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they looked fake, like an actress playing a part. Beside her, some strange men were laughing and whispering something about the insurance money and transfers. I felt like I was suffocating. They were talking about my son's death as if it were a business deal. I returned home with my spirit crushed. Mrs. Rose came to see me again with a plate of hot soup. "Emily, you have to eat something," she said, concerned. "I heard Isabella already moved into a mansion in Miami. How lucky for your daughter-in-law, so young and already with all that inheritance." I nodded without saying anything. I sat in my little house watching Daisy, Mark, and Kevin eat some porridge, and the pain tore my heart apart. My grandchildren, Michael's blood, living on the bare minimum, while Isabella and Simon were in a mansion enjoying everything. I asked myself why. Why did my son have to die for them to have everything? Every night I dreamed of Michael. In my dreams, he would appear in a cloud of smoke, look at me, and say with a broken voice, "Mom, I'm not dead." I would wake up with a jolt, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding. The house was dark. Only the sound of my grandchildren's quiet breathing could be heard. I held my head, trying to push away those images, but the unease grew within me. Something was not right. Michael's death. Isabella's attitude. The whispers about the insurance money. It was all like a puzzle with missing pieces. One morning, as I was arranging the tamales in my cart, a card arrived from Miami. It was a white card with elegant handwriting. "Please do not contact us. Do not look for us. Our family needs peace." Signed, Isabella Torres. I read it over and over, clutching the card so tightly it crumpled. "Our family!" I muttered, my voice trembling with rage. "And what about my grandchildren, Daisy, Mark, Kevin? Aren't they her family?" I balled up the card and threw it in a corner. I felt a fire inside me. Isabella hadn't just taken Michael from me. Now she was trying to erase us completely from her life. After Michael's funeral, my life felt like it was covered in a fog. Every day I kept pushing my tamale cart to the market. I kept cleaning the hotel at night, but my soul had no strength left. My 3 grandchildren, Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, were the only light that kept me on my feet. But the pain of losing my son was a wound that wouldn't close. The newspapers and society magazines were filled with pictures of Isabella Michael's widow, hugging little Simon, calling him the sole heir to the Rodriguez name. I would quietly collect the old newspapers from the stand and sit in my dark kitchen looking at each photo. Simon, with his curly brown hair, his fair skin, and his big round eyes, looked nothing like Michael or anyone in my family. The more I looked at him, the more confused I felt. Why is he like that? I wondered, stroking the photo as if it could give me an answer. One day, while arranging the tamales in my cart at the market, I overheard two vendors whispering. Mrs. Helen, the one who sells vegetables, said in a low voice, "Hey, don't you think little Simon looks a lot like David Torres?" The other one, Linda from the flower stand, put a finger to her lips. "Shh, be quiet. Those people have a lot of money. Getting involved with them is asking for trouble." I was startled and almost dropped the tamale I was holding. David Torres. I had heard that name before from Mrs. Rose, that he was a man who visited Michael's real estate office a lot. A tall man who always wore gray suits with a kind but cold smile. Suddenly, an idea shook me. If Simon didn't look like Michael, but he did look like David, was there something shady going on? I tried to calm down and kept selling, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. My shout of "hot tamales" sounded weak and lifeless that day. As night fell, when Daisy, Mark, and Kevin were fast asleep, I sat alone by the oil lamp. The little house was cold, only the sound of crickets could be heard. I took out an old photo of Michael when he was 5, with a radiant smile next to the cactus we had outside. Then I placed it next to the newspaper with Simon's photo. The boy's face was visible in the yellowish light. Michael's curly hair, my almond-shaped eyes, my mother's slightly flat nose. There was nothing of us in Simon. The difference was so clear, it sent a chill down my spine. I whispered to myself, "Emily, what are you thinking? He's your grandson, your son's son." But the more I thought about it, the less I could sleep. That night I dreamed that Michael came out of a cloud of black smoke, his face pale, pointing at Simon and saying, "Mom, the truth is in him." I woke up with a jolt, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding. That dream was like a warning that pushed me to act. The next day, I decided to find a way to get close to Simon. I found out that Isabella would be bringing him to our town for a charity event in the main square. It was my only chance. I put on my cleanest dress and old straw hat to cover my face and hid in a corner near the square. My heart was pounding as if I were doing something forbidden. In the distance, I saw Isabella dressed luxuriously, holding Simon's hand as they got out of an elegant car. The boy was wearing a little white shirt. His curly hair moved in the wind, and he was entertained by a red balloon. I stood there mixed in with the crowd, keeping my eyes on him. "I just need one clue," I told myself, clutching the shawl I had in my bag. When the reporters surrounded Isabella, Simon wandered off a bit, his balloon floating. I got closer, pretending to pick up a coin from the ground. Just as the boy turned, I saw a hair caught on his little jacket. With trembling hands, I picked it up. I felt that in taking that tiny hair, I was holding the entire truth about my son's life. My heart was beating so fast I thought everyone around me could hear it. I turned quickly and moved away from the crowd, afraid Isabella would recognize me. On the way home, I hid the hair in an old handkerchief and carefully put it in my apron pocket. "This is the beginning, Emily," I told myself, but the fear wouldn't go away. I knew I was entering a dangerous path, but I couldn't stop now. I stood in front of the door of a private clinic on the outskirts of town, my hand clutching the old handkerchief that held Simon's hair. The wind was blowing hard, bringing the morning chill, but my heart was colder. I had saved every dollar from selling tamales, from nights cleaning the hotel, to the point of exhaustion, just to be able to pay for this test. The clinic employee, a young woman with a curious gaze, looked me up and down. "Are you sure you want to do this test?" she asked in a monotone voice full of meaning. "The result could change your life." I nodded, trying to make my voice sound firm. "I need to know the truth." My hands trembled as I placed the money on the counter, crumpled bills soaked with my sweat. The employee took it without another word and gave me a small receipt. I left the clinic, walking down the dusty dirt road, my heart heavy, but with a small light of hope. This was the first step to finding justice for Michael and for my grandchildren. The week of waiting for the results felt like a whole year. Every day I woke up early to make breakfast for Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, almost always tortillas with beans, because there wasn't enough money for more. I laughed and played with them, but inside, anxiety was consuming me. Every time the phone rang, I would jump thinking it was the clinic. But it was almost always Mrs. Rose, asking how I was, or the hotel owner reminding me to be on time. At night, when the children were asleep, I would sit by the oil lamp looking at the old photo of Michael. "Son, am I doing the right thing?" I whispered, as tears rolled down my cheeks. I was afraid the result would destroy everything, but I was also afraid of living with the doubt forever. Finally, on a drizzly morning, I got the call from the clinic. "Mrs.
Emily, the results are ready. You can come pick them up," the employee's voice said. I quickly put on my shawl, my old straw hat, and ran to the bus stop. On the way, I tried not to think. I just prayed, "Dear God, give me strength." When I got to the clinic, the employee handed me a sealed envelope with a look of compassion. I took the envelope, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. I didn't dare open it right there. I just carefully put it in my apron pocket close to my heart, as if it were a part of Michael. When I got home, I waited for the children to fall asleep to open the envelope. Under the flickering light of the oil lamp, I broke the seal and my eyes fixed on the paper. A line in bold hit me like a slap. No biological kinship exists between Simon Torres and the Rodriguez family. I felt my strength leave me and I almost dropped the paper. The truth was as cold as a knife in my heart. Simon was not Michael's son. I sat in silence, my head in my hands, trying to process what I had just read. All the times Isabella had shown off Michael's only son came to my mind. All the times she had pushed me and my grandchildren aside, calling us people who have nothing to do with us. Now everything made sense, but it hurt more than I had imagined. I went out to the yard. The sky was falling apart. People were running to take cover from the rain, but I let the water soak my face. The rain mixed with my tears, cold, icy, but I felt a strange relief. I finally had the proof in my hands. Simon was not my son's blood. But then a new wave of questions flooded my mind. If Simon wasn't Michael's son, who was his real father? And why had Isabella put on this whole show? Michael's death. Could it have something to do with this secret? That night, I spread the DNA result on the old wooden table, looking at it as if it were the last piece of a puzzle. Daisy woke up and walked towards me, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma, what's that paper?" I quickly folded the sheet and forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetie. Grandma is just looking for the truth." She nodded, yawned, and went back to bed. But I knew this truth was not simple. It was the beginning of a path full of dangers. I hugged Daisy, feeling her warmth, but my heart was frozen. I thought about Michael, the accident, the whispers about the insurance money at the wake. Everything was starting to connect, but I wasn't sure yet. I only knew one thing. If Simon was not Michael's son, then my son's death might not have been an accident. The DNA result was like a small fire burning inside me, illuminating the truth, but also filling me with fear. Simon was not Michael's son, that was clear. But the bigger, sharper question stabbed my heart every night. Why? Why did Isabella have to lie? And was my son's death really an accident? I knew I couldn't stop, even if the road ahead was dark and dangerous. I had to find the truth. Not just for Michael, but for Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, my grandchildren waiting for me back home. I decided to follow Isabella in secret. One cold, rainy night, I took a bus from my small town to Miami. I carried an old wicker basket with candies and handkerchiefs to pretend I was a street vendor. I put on my worn straw hat pulled down low to cover my face and told myself, "Emily, you have to be very careful." The bus swayed on the long journey, and the sound of the tires reminded me that I was entering a world that was not mine, a world of money and power. When the bus arrived at the Miami terminal, it was already daytime. The bright ocean sun made me squint. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and began my plan. I found Isabella's white mansion on a tree-lined street so luxurious it took my breath away. Huge houses with high gates, elegant cars coming and going, and the sound of party laughter escaping. I hid in a corner pretending to sell my candies and handkerchiefs on the sidewalk without taking my eyes off the mansion's gate. I spent several days sitting there writing everything down in a small notebook, who came in and out at what time in what car. I noticed that a man appeared frequently driving a black SUV, tall, always in a gray suit. One day I struck up a conversation with a neighbor, an old woman who sold coconuts nearby. "Excuse me, ma'am, who is the gentleman who comes to the White House so often?" I asked, feigning curiosity. The old woman looked around and whispered, "That's David Torres. He's been here a lot lately. They say he was very close to Isabella even before she married the late Michael." I felt my heart stop. David Torres. That name again, like another piece of the puzzle. One night, I sat at a cafe with sidewalk tables right across from the mansion, pretending to read an old newspaper. Through the large window, I saw David come out onto the balcony. Isabella took his arm, laughing and talking as if they were a real married couple. She wore a white silk dress, her hair pulled back, and her eyes sparkled in the light. I felt like I was suffocating. That image was so different from the Isabella I knew, the woman who had called me a nuisance and who had despised my grandchildren. I quickly wrote in my notebook, "David and Isabella, very close balcony, 8 p.m. My hands were shaking, but I knew I was getting closer to the truth. To keep a closer watch, I rented a cheap little room a few streets away from the mansion. The room was small, with damp-stained walls and a bed as hard as a rock, but I didn't care. Every day I went to the sidewalk cafe and wrote everything down. What time did David's car arrive? How long did he stay? What was Isabella doing? Once I decided to take a bigger risk. I followed David to the main bank in Miami, not far from the mansion. I hid behind a pillar, pretending to tie my shoes without losing sight of him. David went in, spoke with a bank employee, and came out with a black leather briefcase. When he stopped to answer a call, I crept closer just enough to hear a fragment. "Yes, the life insurance, $60 million. It's done." Those words were like an electric shock. $60 million. A huge insurance policy, and Michael's death suddenly appeared in my mind as a well-orchestrated plan. I wrote down all the details in my notebook, my hands shaking so much that my handwriting came out crooked. That night, lying in the hard bed of my room, I listened to the sound of the waves in the distance. Every sound reminded me that the truth I had just discovered could cost me my life. I thought about Michael, the accident, the column of black smoke on TV. If my son's death was a murder for money, then I was up against ruthless people. I clutched my notebook, hid it well at the bottom of my candy basket, and told myself, "Emily, you have to be even more careful." But deep down, I knew I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far, and the truth about Michael's death was something I had to uncover no matter the price. I knew that the DNA result and the notes in my notebook were not enough to unmask Isabella and David. They were just pieces of a puzzle, but I was missing the direct proof, a clear confession they couldn't deny. That idea tormented me day and night, giving me no peace in my little room in Miami. I had to act, even if it meant putting myself in danger. I thought about Michael, my son's smile, the days when as a child he would hug me and promise to make me proud. Now it was I who had to fulfill that promise to find justice for him. One full moon night with the Miami sky full of stars, I decided to risk it all. I disguised myself as a gardener with an old worn jacket, a straw hat pulled down low to cover my face, and a bag of old tools I borrowed from the old man who sold coconuts. In the bag, I had some shears, a small trowel, and my notebook, my only weapon. I walked towards Isabella's white mansion, my heart pounding so hard I felt it would burst out of my chest. The high gate was closed, but I noticed a small path on the side that led to the backyard. I hid behind some bougainvillea bushes. The branches scratched my arms, but I didn't care. Through the glass door of the living room, which was slightly ajar, yellow light escaped, illuminating the silhouettes of Isabella and David sitting on a sofa. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Isabella's voice reached me low, but clear, sharp as a knife. "The accident was perfect, David. No witnesses, no proof. No one suspects a thing." I felt my blood run cold. I clutched my old shawl with all my might to keep from screaming. David replied in his deep, cold voice, "With the insurance money, we'll be untouchable. $60 million, Isa. We did it." Those words were a stab straight to my heart. Michael's death was not an accident. It was a planned murder. I started to tremble.
Tears streamed down my face, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions win. This was my only chance. I took my old cell phone out of my pocket, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. This phone, the one I used to call my grandchildren, was now my last hope. I pressed the record button, trying to keep my hand steady, pointing towards the glass door. But in my nervousness, my hand brushed against a small flower pot nearby. The pot wobbled and fell to the ground, making a dull thud in the silence of the night. Isabella's voice stopped abruptly. I heard the creak of the sofa and then footsteps approaching the door. My heart stopped. I hid deeper among the flowers, holding my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. A small, white, fluffy dog ran out of the house, barking loudly at me. I cringed, breaking into a cold sweat despite the cool sea breeze. "Isabella, you're being paranoid," David said in an annoyed tone. He gave the dog a little kick, which yelped and ran off. "It was probably just a cat." Isabella muttered something and the footsteps moved away. The glass door closed, but it wasn't locked. I waited a few more minutes until I was sure they were back on the sofa, and then I crawled out of the bushes. I still had the phone in my hand. The recording was still running. I quickly checked it. Isabella's and David's voices were audible, a bit low but clear. It was the proof I needed, but it also filled me with terror. If they found out I had overheard them, I didn't even want to imagine what would happen. I left the mansion in the darkness, walking quickly but silently. The way back to my room felt long and lonely. Only the sound of the Miami waves crashing on the shore reminded me that there was no turning back. I walked along the beach, the moon reflecting on the water, but my heart found no peace. The recording on my phone was like a bomb ready to destroy everything, but it could also blow up in my hands. I clutched the phone, put it in my pocket close to my heart, and told myself, "Emily, you have to do this. For Michael." The recording on my old cell phone was like a ticking time bomb, keeping me in a constant state of anxiety. I clutched it every night, afraid that if I let it go, the truth about Michael's death would vanish. After days of hesitation, I decided to take it to the Miami Police Department, hoping that justice would be on my side. I entered the station, my worn sandals squeaking on the cold stone floor, hugging the phone as if it were a treasure. Detective Guillermo Vargas, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze, received me in a small office filled with papers. I told him everything from the DNA result to what I had overheard outside the mansion. When I played the recording, Isabella's and David's voices sounded faint but clear. Vargas listened, nodding, but his expression didn't reflect the hope I was expecting. "Mrs. Emily, this evidence is very weak," he said in a grave voice. "They will say you imagined it, or worse, they will sue you for invasion of privacy. Without a living witness or official documents, it's very difficult for us to proceed." I froze. I felt the floor open up beneath me. "But it's the truth," I said with a lump in my throat on the verge of tears. Vargas sighed. "I understand, Mrs. Emily. But with people like the Torres family, the truth is not easily accepted." I left the police station with heavy feet, feeling like I was sinking into despair. Justice, it seemed, was much further away than I thought. That night, I returned to my cheap little room in Miami, where the smell of dampness mixed with the sound of the waves. I sat on the hard bed and cried uncontrollably. So many days risking myself, so many sleepless nights, only to be told the evidence is weak by the detective. I thought of Daisy, Mark, and Kevin, my grandchildren waiting for me back home. What did I do wrong? I asked myself as tears soaked my hands. I wanted to give up, to go back to my kids and forget everything. But then the image of Michael appeared in my mind, the little boy who would hug me and promise to make me proud. "Forgive me, son," I whispered, my voice lost in the darkness. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. 3 short knocks, 2 long ones. I jumped. My heart was pounding. "Who is it?" I asked in a trembling voice, clutching the cell phone. No one answered. I thought of Isabella, of David, of the suspicious glances I had noticed on the street. Did they already know I was investigating them? Had they sent someone to silence me? I stood up, my legs shaking, and approached the door, grabbing an old wooden chair as a weapon. When the door opened a little, I was breathless. It was Michael in the flesh thinner, with a grown-out beard, wearing an old worn jacket. His reddened eyes looked at me full of pain and regret. I burst into tears and ran to hug him, my tears soaking his clothes. "My son, are you really alive?" I said between sobs, my voice broken. Michael hugged me back. His body was trembling. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't die. I couldn't let you and the children be in danger." We sat on the floor of the small room, the flickering light of the oil lamp illuminating Michael's face. He told me everything in a low, tired voice. The day of the accident, while I was driving on the highway, I noticed something strange. A weird wire under the seat. I pulled over, checked, and heard a ticking sound. Michael set his gaze distant. I barely managed to jump out of the car seconds before it exploded. I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew Isabella and David were behind it. So I had to fake my death to look for proof. I listened with a shattered heart. My son, the boy I raised, had almost lost his life to the greed of others. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" I asked as the tears continued to flow. Michael took my hand. His voice broke. "I was afraid that if you knew, you would go after them and they would hurt you. I had to protect you and my children." Michael told me he had hidden for months in the hills thanks to an old friend, David, who gave him shelter. He survived by doing heavy labor cutting wood, working in the fields, so no one would suspect. During that time, he secretly gathered evidence, a copy of the life insurance policy's secret messages between David and a stranger, and most importantly, a video of a mechanic they hired to plant the bomb. "He regretted it, Mom," Michael said, handing me a small USB drive. "He recorded a video confessing everything because he was afraid they would involve him. Mom, this is everything I have. We have to take it to Detective Vargas now." I clutched the USB drive. It felt as heavy as the entire world. My tears fell, a mixture of happiness for having my son alive and pain for everything he had to endure. That morning, Michael and I walked into the Miami Police Department, our hearts heavy but full of determination. The small USB drive in my hand seemed to hold our family's destiny. Detective Guillermo Vargas was waiting for us in his small office, the smell of old coffee and damp papers hanging in the air. I gave him the USB, my hand trembling while Michael stood beside me, his gaze firm. When Vargas watched the video, a blurry but clear recording of the mechanic's confession about how he planted the bomb in Michael's car, he frowned, slammed his fist on the table, and said in a decisive voice, "Your son is the living witness. This time we have enough evidence to request an arrest warrant." I looked at Michael. My eyes filled with tears. My son, whom I thought I had lost forever, was here being the key to uncovering the truth. "Thank you, Detective," I said, my voice choked with emotion. Vargas nodded. "Mrs. Emily, this time justice will be on your side. But be careful, the Torres family is not easy to deal with." That night, Michael and I returned to the hotel room, waiting anxiously. As night fell, police sirens echoed through the street, and blue and red lights flashed outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw the police surrounding Isabella's white mansion. They brought her out in handcuffs, screaming desperately. "You're mistaken, I didn't do anything." David struggled to break free, but was subdued at the entrance. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut mixed with the sound of the Miami waves like the final music to their crime. The next morning, the newspapers exploded with the news. "Businessman Michael Rodriguez is alive. Insurance murder plot uncovered." I read the headline with a mix of relief and pain. Justice had been served, but the price was years of living with the pain of having lost my son. After those chaotic days, Michael and I returned to our small town. The little house was now filled with laughter. Daisy, Mark, and Kevin wouldn't leave their father's side. "Dad, where were you for so long?" Daisy asked with bright eyes. Michael hugged her, his voice soft. "I'm sorry, sweetie. From now on, I'm not going anywhere." Simon, the boy Isabella had called the sole heir, also found a place in our arms. Although he was not Michael's blood, he was an innocent child. I stroked his hair and said, "Will you stay here with your grandma?" The boy nodded, and his radiant smile warmed my heart. One day, Michael took us all to a charity event at the Children's Hospital. I pushed my tamale cart and gave them away to families in need. There, Michael happened to meet Sarah Jimenez, a pediatric nurse with a smile as warm as the sun. At first, they just spoke politely, asking about the sick children. But when Sarah knelt to wipe a milk stain off Kevin's shirt or hugged Simon to comfort him because he was afraid of needles, I saw how Michael's eyes lit up, a light I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom, Sarah is very special." Michael confessed to me one night as we sat in the yard. "I never thought I could love someone again after all my mistakes, but when I'm with her, I want to be a better man." I smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, if she makes you want to be better, then that's true love." Over time, Sarah became part of the family. She taught Daisy English, explaining each word with patience. She played ball with Mark, laughing out loud when the boy missed a throw. She taught Kevin how to draw, helping him color his pictures, and she read stories to Simon every night with a voice so soft it lulled him to sleep. I looked at Sarah, grateful for bringing the warmth my family had lacked for so long. "Mrs. Emily, I love being here," Sarah told me once as we kneaded dough for tamales together. "Your family is very special." I took her hand, my voice choked. "No, Sarah, it's you who makes our family more special." One afternoon, as the setting sun painted the yard gold, I saw Michael kneel before Sarah with a simple ring in his hand. "Sarah, will you build a real family with me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Daisy, Mark, Kevin, and Simon were all around shouting with excitement. Sarah nodded, her eyes full of tears. "Yes, Michael, I will." I stood there hugging Daisy with tears streaming down my cheeks. After so much suffering, my son had finally found happiness. The wedding was simple but full of joy in a small local church. I sat in the front row clapping to the rhythm of the music, watching Michael in a simple suit and Sarah in a pure white wedding dress. Daisy was the flower girl, walking a bit clumsily but radiant. Mark carried the rings with great seriousness, though he couldn't stop smiling. Kevin threw paper flower petals, filling the church with joy. Simon ran everywhere with a laugh so contagious that everyone laughed with him. When the pastor gave the blessing, I felt my heart finally heal. So many years of pain, so many nights crying in silence, now dissolved with the laughter of my family. The $60 million trust, the insurance money Michael now used to build a new future. He opened a small diner in town where he sold tamales and snacks, so I no longer had to push my cart under the sun. A portion of the money went to my grandchildren, a scholarship for Daisy's studies, soccer lessons, for Mark painting classes for Kevin, and a savings account for Simon. "Mom, I want my children to have a better life," Michael told me once as we all had dinner together. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Son, just seeing you happy is enough for me." I sit in the yard of my house watching my family gathered. Michael and Sarah holding hands, the children playing, their laughter filling the air. I think about the dark days when I thought I had lost everything. But now justice had been served, and true happiness had returned with the love and unity of family. I close my story with immense peace, knowing that no matter how hard life was, the love for my son and my grandchildren guided me through all the storms. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I am truly curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all, to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I'm leaving you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.